dream too vivid, details too precise. Could sleep hold the key to truth? Welcome to Revenge Oath. I'm your moderator, Conan Doyle. Let me know in the comments. Where are you solving this from? Your presence turns this tale into a shared revelation. It was a particularly sullen morning in early March, and I found myself peering out of the window of our Baker Street lodgings at a drizzling London sky, wondering whether the endless grey might seep permanently into my bones. Sherlock Holmes, however, was his usual self, curled languidly on the settee, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, and his eyes half closed, as though in meditation. The only sound was the crackling of coal in the grate and the occasional impatient flutter of a newspaper turned to abruptly. I see, Watson, that you have once again abandoned your attempt to finish the naval treaty for the 4th time, Holmes murmured, his eyes still closed. I started. The copy of my account lay closed in my lap, indeed unread for some minutes. Holmes, how? My dear fellow, the deduction is simplicity itself. You've been sighing every 30 seconds and staring fixedly out of the window. The book, I note, has not shifted in your lap, yet your pipe has been lit and tapped out. That suggests distraction rather than enjoyment. I smiled despite myself. Well then, perhaps distraction is all one can hope for on such a damp and uninspiring morning. It was at that moment that a violent knock rattled our door. 3 sharp raps, followed by a muffled exclamation in the hall. Mrs. Hudson's voice rose in alarm, and moments later, the door swung open to admit a man who looked not unlike one of those poor souls described in the penny dreadfuls, dishevelled, pale as chalk, and wide-eyed with some inner terror. Holmes sat up sharply. "Good heavens, sir, are you quite well?" The man, tall, bony, with ginger-tinged hair and wearing a crumpled black morning coat, seemed barely to hear. He staggered forward 2 steps and grasped the mantelpiece with a trembling hand. "My name is Christopher de Vries," he gasped. I apologize for the intrusion, but I was told you were the only one who could possibly understand. Please sit," Holmes said gently, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Dr. Watson will fetch you a brandy." I complied quickly, observing the man with medical concern. He had the look of a man who had endured some psychic blow, eyes ringed with sleeplessness, lips dry and colorless. When he had taken a few sips of the brandy, de Vries looked up. "Last night, Mr. Holmes, I had a dream, a vivid dream, and in it I saw a man murdered." Holmes leaned forward with interest. "A nightmare?" "No," the man whispered. "A vision. I saw the man's face clearly, every detail, every corner of the room. I can still smell the pipe smoke. The strange thing is, this morning I read in the newspaper that he was found dead, just as I saw in the dream, in the exact manner." Holmes's eyes glittered. "Who was the man?" "Sir Roderick Varner. He was my employer, a philanthropist, a collector, a difficult man at times. But he is dead, strangled in his drawing room with a crimson sash, just like in the dream." There was a pause. Watson, recovering from his own astonishment, said, "But surely, Mr. de Vries, dreams are not admissible evidence in reality. You might have simply imagined—" "No," de Vries said, rising. "I was never there. I've never been in the room, and yet I could describe it to the last detail. There was a Turkish lamp, broken, a chessboard tipped over. The killer wore gloves." Holmes had not moved, but his fingers drummed the armrest of his chair. "And what brought you here, precisely?" De Vries lowered his voice. "Because Scotland Yard now believes I did it. I was found standing at the gates of the house this morning, barefoot and disoriented, as though I had walked there in my sleep." A silence fell. Holmes's gaze was fixed on the man with a hawk-like intensity. "Mr. de Vries," he said at last, "you have given us a most singular beginning. A murder, witnessed in a dream, and an accused man who woke at the scene. I confess I am intrigued. He stood up, all lassitude gone. Watson, the game is afoot. Holmes wasted no time once Christopher de Vries had been calmed and reassured that he would not, for the moment, be handed over to the authorities. My companion's mind had already flown ahead to Kensington, where the late Sir Roderick Varner had lived in considerable splendour, if the name meant what I believed it did. Watson, coat and hat. We shall take de Vries with us, and let Scotland Yard decide what to make of him once we've inspected the crime scene. It is far more prudent to study the facts ourselves before allowing Inspector Lestrade to march about, knocking truth off its perch with those ill-sized boots of his. As we rode in the cab through the grey-laced streets of London, de Vries sat silently beside me, his eyes locked somewhere in the middle distance. I studied him carefully, still uncertain whether we were dealing with an innocent man haunted by a strange vision, or something far more elaborate and sinister. Holmes, meanwhile, seemed energized, his eyes dancing with that peculiar gleam I had come to recognize. When he was in possession of a puzzle with just enough irregular edges, his mind came alive, as if stirred by electricity. Sir Roderick Varner, Holmes mused aloud, collector of antiquities, trustee of the Imperial Society for Foreign Curios, and, according to several whisperings last year, a man who made enemies more quickly than friends. I blinked. You know him. By reputation only, Holmes replied. A man of repute, intellect, and considerable wealth, yet rather too fond of secrets and private affairs. A dreamer might call him mystical. A logician would call him guarded. Kensington offered no refuge from the weather. A light drizzle hung in the air like a veil. The Varner residence stood behind wrought-iron gates flanked by 2 stone lions, grand but cold. A constable recognized Holmes instantly, lifting the latch without challenge. Inside, the gravel path crunched underfoot as we approached the wide red-brick facade. Inspector Lestrade greeted us in the vestibule, his usual expression of irritation softened only slightly by the presence of Holmes. "Well, I rather thought you'd nose your way into this, Holmes," he said. "And bringing the fellow along too, eh?" He eyed de Vries with skepticism. Holmes raised a hand. "Let us not presume guilt before examining the scene. I understand the body has not yet been removed." "Still in the drawing room," Lestrade confirmed. "No signs of forced entry, no witnesses. And your man there," he pointed a thumb at de Vries, "was found outside the property at dawn, barefoot, no coat, muttering nonsense. Said he saw it in a dream." "Just so," Holmes said mildly. "Lead the way." We passed through a wide hall adorned with oil paintings, mostly landscapes and ruined temples, into the drawing room where the murder had occurred. A rich oriental rug blanketed the floor. The air carried the distinct scent of sandalwood and old books. Sir Roderick Varner's body had already been respectfully covered, but Holmes requested the sheet lifted for his inspection. The late gentleman lay on his back beside a wing-backed chair, a length of crimson sash knotted cruelly around his neck. His features were frozen in surprise, more than fear. A shattered Turkish lamp lay near the hearth, its colourful glass scattered. A chessboard had indeed been overturned, with white pieces lying at odd angles beneath the table. The curtains were drawn against the light. "Lestrade," Holmes asked, "do you mind terribly if I take the liberty of observation without interference for 5 minutes?" "Only 5, Holmes," Lestrade replied, folding his arms. "We've work to do, and I've a coroner with a schedule to keep." Holmes knelt immediately. His hands moved without hesitation, never touching the body but sweeping the floor, lifting the rug's edge, studying smudges by the fireplace, and sniffing the air in short, sharp bursts. "Watson, take note," he said. 3 important things. Firstly, the pipe on the side table is recently used, but not by the deceased. He preferred cigars, as that cabinet confirms. Secondly, There are wax drips beneath the chess table, though no candle is currently present. Thirdly, the sash used for strangulation is of foreign weave. See this embroidered pattern near the knot. Burmese, I believe. He stood and crossed to the window. And now, a fourth point. The sill, moist. The window was opened, recently closed again. Rain on the outside. Damp on the inside. The killer escaped this way, though not barefoot. Lestrade rolled his eyes. You see ghosts in the curtains, Holmes. The man was found at the gate. Holmes ignored him. He turned to De Vries. Now, Mr. De Vries, I ask for precision. Describe exactly what you saw in your dream. De Vries, pale but more coherent now, nodded. Sir Roderick was seated in that chair. The killer stood behind him, tall, wearing gloves and a coat with brass buttons. I couldn't see his face. There was a whisper. Then the sash was pulled tight around the throat. The lamp fell during the struggle, and the board was knocked as Sir Roderick tried to stand. Anything else? De Vries hesitated. Yes, there was a smell, strong and bitter, like burnt almonds. Holmes froze. Watson? Prussic acid, I said at once. Cyanide. Holmes nodded grimly, but not administered, only present, possibly to confuse the scene. He moved swiftly now. At the hearth, he examined a small brass urn. Lestrade, he called. Did your men check the ashes? Of course, just some burnt papers. Holmes extracted a pair of tongs from the fireplace tools and gingerly lifted a curled fragment from within. Here, Watson, read what you can of this. I squinted at the charred scrap. Portion of a letter. Regret the necessity. Will be exposed if... Seek silence. No signature. A threat or a confession, Holmes said softly. In either case, the kind of letter one destroys in panic. He turned again to De Vries. Your relationship with Sir Roderick? I was his secretary, De Vries said. I handled correspondence, schedules. He had become paranoid in recent weeks. He claimed a former associate meant to destroy him, someone from his travels, but he never named the person. Holmes's gaze narrowed. Travels where? India, then Siam. Burma, I believe, most recently. Lestrade snorted. A secretary with dreams, an exotic past, and an unfortunate morning walk. A convenient scapegoat, wouldn't you say? No, Holmes said, his voice suddenly cold. A scapegoat, perhaps, but not convenient. Too impossible to be credible. No killer frames his victim so neatly as to leave him at the crime scene, barefoot, incoherent, and raving about dreams. It draws suspicion too perfectly. He pointed toward the sash. This was meant to suggest intimacy, but no personal struggle occurred. Sir Roderick didn't rise in time. Note the angle of the bruising. He was murdered by someone who knew how to kill swiftly and escape quietly. The dream, Lestrade, is not a confession. It is a message. I intend to find out whose. As we left the drawing room, Holmes turned to me and said in a low voice, Watson, there is something unutterably wrong about this crime. A ghostly vision, a foreign scarf, a scent of cyanide, and above all, the dreamer who may not have dreamed at all. He paused on the stairs, eyes gleaming. We shall visit Sir Roderick's private study next. I suspect our killer left more than ashes behind. And with that, we ascended. Holmes ascended the staircase 2 steps at a time, with that peculiar grace he summoned when his mind was thoroughly engaged. I followed more cautiously, glancing back to see De Vries lingering below in the entrance hall, looking every bit like a man caught between waking and nightmare. The upper corridor of the Varna house bore the same stately air as the floor below, framed prints of antiquities, neat lines of moulding, and plush carpet that muffled our steps. Holmes paused before a tall mahogany door with an ivory handle. This would be the study, he murmured, the inner sanctum. He turned the handle and stepped inside without knocking. The room was large but surprisingly austere. A great walnut desk occupied the center, its surface buried under correspondence, a brass desk lamp, and several thick books. Two low glass-fronted cabinets lined the far wall, their contents vaguely discernible: scrolls, figurines, bundles of yellowed papers. The hearth was cold, the room untouched since the murder. Holmes's gaze swept across it with clinical precision. Observe, Watson. Not a drawer disturbed, not a lock forced. If the motive were theft, it was conducted with extraordinary discretion, or not at all. He moved to the desk and stood behind it, fingers hovering above the papers. Here, he said suddenly, a letter begun, but not posted. He read aloud. Mr. L., I cannot, will not, be blackmailed. You will do as you see fit, but understand that I retain copies of everything. Should I fall, you will not rise unscathed. R.V. He looked up, eyes alight. More fire, more threat. And note, Watson, Mr. L., not a full name, but the initial may matter. I considered this. DeVries said Sir Roderick mentioned someone from abroad, a former associate. Indeed. And I suspect the connection to Burma is no accident. This scarf, this letter, and now this mysterious Mr. L. all suggest that Sir Roderick's past had begun to catch up with him. Holmes moved to the cabinet and peered through the glass. Look closely. An entire shelf of documents, scrolls, translations. All in Burmese script, if I'm not mistaken. Varna may have been a collector, but this is the archive of someone deeply involved. Likely more than a casual enthusiast. He tried the cabinet door and found it locked. With a deft twist of his hand, he extracted a small pick from his coat. Within moments, the lock clicked open. Watson, take a look at this. Inside lay a leather-bound journal. Holmes opened it gently, revealing neat, fastidious handwriting. Dates, names, and notes scrawled beside what appeared to be temple sketches and transcriptions of native phrases. Sir Roderick wasn't just studying Burmese artifacts. He was cataloguing local legends. This entry, the Song of the Sleeper God, a charm against retribution. Curious. A dream that foretells doom, rather like our Mr. DeVries's experience. You think this journal connects to the murder? Holmes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned a few more pages and stopped abruptly. Here, Lyndon Rook, full name, marked beside a passage describing the acquisition of a golden idol in the hills north of Mandalay. It says, Rook insisted we carry it under cover of night. Claims local unrest is brewing. He looked up. There's our Mr. L. And now we have a man with a possible grudge. I nodded slowly. Rook could be the associate Sir Roderick feared. But then why involve DeVries? Why would he dream about the murder unless... Holmes snapped his fingers. Unless the dream was no dream at all. I frowned. But Holmes, he was asleep in his lodgings on the other side of the city. Unless someone wanted him to be found at the scene, Holmes interrupted. Drugged, perhaps. DeVries claimed he awoke barefoot and disoriented at the gate. We must test his clothing. Mud on the hem, trace substances under his nails, perhaps even chloroform. But this requires haste. At that moment, we heard heavy steps on the stairs and Lestrade's voice below. Holmes closed the journal and placed it in his coat. I shall return this when the case is resolved, he said to the empty room, before we exited quietly. Back downstairs, Lestrade was frowning over a telegram handed to him by a constable. Holmes, he said, something odd's come through. There's a report from a Mr. Percy Latham in Shadwell. He claims his lodger, one Lyndon Rook, left abruptly this morning. Said he was headed to see a man about a debt. Didn't say who, but he was carrying a medical bag. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Where is Latham now? At his rooms in Shadwell. I've sent men to keep watch. Holmes turned sharply to Lestrade. We must speak with Mr. Latham immediately. The medical bag and the odd phrasing suggest Rook may intend further harm. or that he's already done more than we realize. Lestrade looked askance. You still think De Vries is innocent? I think, Holmes said, that De Vries is a pawn, and someone with an old grudge, has arranged this game rather cleverly. We left the Varna house once again, this time with Holmes moving briskly, as though time itself were narrowing. The fog had thickened, and as we stepped into the cab, the city seemed to blur into a smudged dream. De Vries sat inside already, looking even more wan than before. Holmes, I asked quietly, do you believe De Vries was hypnotized, or made to walk in his sleep somehow? I believe, Holmes replied, that someone wanted to test whether guilt could be planted by suggestion. But, more importantly, I believe De Vries saw something, not in a dream, but through the haze of a sedative. The killer may have left the study thinking him unconscious. I stared. You mean he witnessed the crime, but only remembers fragments? Precisely. And if we can recover those fragments, Watson, the entire illusion will collapse. As the cab turned eastward toward Shadwell, Holmes folded his arms and closed his eyes. But I could see the flicker of his mind beneath the stillness, turning, measuring, plotting. The game, it seemed, had barely begun. The cab rattled eastward toward the Shadwell district, the fog growing heavier with each block we passed. Gas lamps along the narrow streets cast halos through the mist, their flickering light giving the impression of movement where there was none. Inside the cab, the air was tense. De Vries, pressed into the corner opposite me, seemed to shrink with every mile. Holmes, hunched forward with his gloved hands folded beneath his chin, said nothing for some time. Then, as if finishing a thought long in motion, he said quietly, "It is not enough to be innocent, Mr. De Vries. One must also be proven so. And you were found in precisely the place the killer needed you to be. That suggests a design too intricate to be coincidence." De Vries gave a bitter, tremulous smile. "I have no idea how I got there, Mr. Holmes. I swear to you, nothing. One moment I was in my flat, reading, and the next, waking by the gates. No memory between." Holmes nodded slightly. "We may recover more than you suspect. The mind, when jarred by trauma or drugs, sometimes stores fragments out of sequence. A scent, a voice, a pattern of light. All can be the key." We arrived in Shadwell just as the bells of a nearby chapel tolled 3. The constable posted outside number 19 Crowther Lane nodded to Lestrade, who had joined us on horseback, and now dismounted stiffly. "No sign of the man returning," the constable reported. "Good," Holmes said. "Then we have a moment's grace." Inside, the building was narrow and worn, its wooden stair creaking as we ascended. Mr. Percy Latham, the landlord, was a squat man with a comb-over, half-buttoned waistcoat, and the nervous energy of someone uncertain whose side to favor. He met us on the second-floor landing. "He's not been back since this morning," Latham said. "Packed a bag, said he had a debt to settle. Walked out calm, as you please." Holmes glanced around. "May we see his room?" Latham opened the door. It was a spare space. Bed, writing table, a battered trunk in the corner. The window faced east and was streaked with soot. Holmes entered like a man entering a chapel, touching nothing at first, only taking in the room as a whole. "Notice, Watson," he murmured, "how carefully disordered this appears. A book open but turned downward. No reader does that. One shoe placed under the bed, the other carelessly against the trunk. These are meant to suggest hasty departure, but were likely staged." Lestrade frowned. "Staged by Rook, or by someone else?" "That is the question," Holmes replied. "Watson, help me with the trunk." We lifted the lid. Inside were folded clothes, a few coins, and at the very bottom, a leather satchel, unlatched. Holmes opened it with care. Within was a small glass vial, stoppered and labelled faintly in ink, Mandragora. Next to it, a torn page from what appeared to be an older volume, its ink faded and edges curled with time. He read aloud, Used in ceremonies of sleepwalking and shadow binding, induces suggestibility, temporary memory dissociation, and visual hallucinations. The subject may act upon spoken cues while unaware. He looked up, his eyes hard. This is no ordinary sedative. This is a tool of psychological manipulation, the perfect drug for engineering a false witness. Lestrade leaned in, scowling. You think he drugged De Vries with this? Made him walk through the city like some puppet? I think Rook used more than just mandragora, Holmes said. He used symbolism, familiarity, even myth. Varner and Rook both believed in these legends they studied. Rook turned that belief into a method of control. That is why De Vries remembers the crime as a dream. He was there, but under influence, a living phantom at the edge of the scene. De Vries, who had remained silent at the doorway, now stepped in, his face pale but intent. That smell, the bitter one, I have smelled it before, here, in this room. I didn't remember until just now. Holmes turned to him with interest. Go on. About a week ago, De Vries said. He invited me here. Rook said he had something to show me. He made tea. I remember feeling faint after I left. I thought it was the fog or fatigue. But now, I think he was testing it on me. Holmes placed a hand on De Vries's shoulder. Then that was likely the first trial. You responded, and he built the rest around it. This is not murder by impulse. This is murder by ritual. Not for belief, but for strategy. A rustling sound came from the floorboard under the window. Holmes crouched quickly and pulled up a loose slat. From the gap, he extracted a small journal, its pages written in a different hand than Varner's, more jagged, impatient. This, Holmes said, flipping it open, is Rook's. His tone is confessional, or gloating. He read a few lines aloud. He called me thief, hypocrite, fool. He took what we found and locked it away. But I saw what it could do. Not the relic, but the dream. De Vries is pliable, a blank page. I need only guide his mind. He will walk the path I choose. Watson felt a chill crawl down his spine. He's mad. Worse, Holmes said. He is rational enough to be dangerous. Just then, footsteps sounded on the stair below. A constable's voice called, Out! He's here. Holmes crossed to the window and peered down into the foggy street. There, black coat, brass buttons. It's Rook. Lestrade pulled his revolver. Let's take him. But Holmes raised a hand. Number, let him reach the door. He may carry something that completes the illusion. If he believes De Vries is still suggestible, he may say something that proves everything. We waited in silence. The door creaked open. Rook entered quietly, unaware of our presence. He stepped toward the bed and placed something beneath the pillow, a folded letter. Then he spoke, almost whispering, as if to someone asleep. You will remember now. The sash, the dream, the idol. You saw nothing else. You walked and did not question. The dream is true. The dream is truth. Holmes stepped forward. I believe that will do, Mr. Rook. Rook spun, startled, his face twisting from surprise into something colder. Holmes! Yes, and you've given us precisely what we need. Rook's hand darted inside his coat. Lestrade was faster. Don't move, he barked, revolver drawn. Rook's hand froze. Then slowly, he pulled it free. Empty. Holmes moved to the pillow and retrieved the letter. Unfolding it, he read aloud. If he doubts, remind him of the smell, the chessboard, the voice behind the chair. These are the anchors. Repeat them. He folded the letter neatly. So it was all rehearsed. A performance built for one frightened man, and a corpse to support the story. Rook's voice was quiet but defiant. Varner destroyed men. He took our work and turned it into dinner conversation for his clubs. I wanted the truth honored. I used what I learned. Holmes's eyes, sharp and gleaming, met Rook's. You used deception. You killed with craft, then tried to twist the mind of an innocent to carry your guilt. You did not honor knowledge. You weaponized it. Lestrade stepped forward. You'll have plenty of time to reflect on that, Rook. He cuffed the man with a clink of iron. Holmes turned to De Vries, whose face had drained of color once more. Your nightmare is ending, Mr. De Vries, and now that you begin to remember it clearly, it will no longer haunt you. As we stepped back into the London fog, Holmes lit a cigarette with an almost serene expression. Curious thing, Watson. Rook believed dreams could hold truth, but it was his belief that undid him. He forgot that reality, however obscured, leaves fingerprints. And in the end, I said, his dream betrayed him. Holmes exhaled smoke. Indeed, and I dare say he never saw that coming. As we emerged once more into the murky streets of Shadwell, the air thick with the damp stink of river fog and coal smoke, there was a peculiar sense of stillness among us. Rook had been taken into custody, his carefully wrought illusion shattered, and yet Holmes's pace as we returned to the cab was slower than before. He walked with his hands in his pockets, head bowed, as if still listening for some echo in the silence, a final chord not yet resolved. I climbed in beside him and watched as he stared through the pane, the mist outside beating against the glass in trembling rivulets. You've caught the man, Holmes, I said after a long pause. He confessed without quite meaning to. Surely that must satisfy even your standards. Holmes gave a slight shrug. It is tidy, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Then what troubles you? He did not answer immediately, and when he did, his words were cautious. There is a fine difference, Watson, between a confession and a full explanation. Rook's plan was artful, yes, but something in it rings false. Not in structure, but in intent. There's a missing motivation. Why go to such elaborate lengths to frame De Vries when a simple crime, strangulation, robbery, would have sufficed? Why the drug? Why the dream? Because Rook was mad, I offered, or believed in some mystical nonsense. He spoke of dreams as if they could be truth. Holmes gave me a sharp glance. Men of science have committed atrocities under the same illusion. No, Watson, belief alone is not sufficient. Rook planned this too carefully. There is something more, some element yet hidden. We arrived back at Baker Street just as the last grey light was bleeding from the sky. Mrs. Hudson, ever the diligent guardian of our comforts, had left a pot of tea warming beside the fire. Holmes ignored it entirely, instead retrieving the journal taken from Sir Roderick's study and leafing through it once more. There, he muttered, stopping at a half-torn page near the back. Look at this passage. Golden idol recovered near the ruins of Sipar, refused by local guide. Said to be cursed, whispered of a shadow that walks with its thief. Rook dismissed it. I did not. He tapped the page. Sir Roderick feared something. Not just the man, but the symbol, that idol. And recall what De Vries said in the cab. He remembered the smell, the chessboard, and the idol. But it was not among the possessions recovered. I leaned forward. You think the idol is missing? I know it is, Holmes replied, and I believe it is the true motive behind all this. Rook did not merely want revenge, he wanted something returned to him. I blinked. Then he didn't come to kill Sir Roderick for what he had done, but for what he had taken. Holmes stood abruptly. Precisely. And if Rook didn't recover it before being arrested, then it is still somewhere in the Varna house. Without another word, he reached for his coat and gestured for mine. Within moments, we were back in the cab and heading west, the horses plodding through the slick evening streets with weary rhythm. By the time we arrived at the Varna residence once more, darkness had settled over the city, broken only by the haloed glow of gas lamps along the garden path. Lestrade met us at the door, a brow raised in irritation. You again? I find myself drawn to unfinished compositions, Holmes replied smoothly. I need access to the late Sir Roderick's study once more. Lestrade grunted, but stood aside. 5 minutes. I've a constable posted and a list of items already recorded. Don't move anything, Holmes. Holmes offered him a smile so benign it could only have meant disobedience. We passed swiftly through the hall and up the stairs. The study was just as we had left it. Holmes went directly to the cabinet that had held the Burmese scrolls. He ran a hand along the back panel, tapping gently, then reached down into the lowest shelf and pulled sharply. With a soft click, a portion of the cabinet slid inward. "False panel," he murmured, revealing a hollow behind the scrolls. Inside was a small bundle wrapped in crimson silk, ancient and cracked with age. Holmes lifted it gently and peeled back the cloth. The idol gleamed softly in the gaslight, gold-tinted and roughly carved, its eyes too large, its mouth frozen in a rictus of warning. There was something grotesque in its posture, a figure seated in repose, yet tense, as though waiting to move. Holmes stared at it for a long moment. "Watson," he said, "does it strike you that this object, so evidently ancient, was hidden here not for display but concealment? Sir Roderick feared it. Yes, but why keep it at all?" He turned to me. "Because destroying it would mean acknowledging its power, and returning it would mean surrendering the control it gave him. I suspect this idol held more sway over these men than even they understood. It became the fulcrum of their conflict." Holmes rewrapped the figure and placed it into his coat. "I will see that this is sent to the British Museum, or better still, returned to Burma through the proper diplomatic channels. But now we come to our final task, and that is to confront Rook not as a prisoner, but as a man who has failed. He will tell us what we need to know, not because we force it, but because he cannot bear the thought that the idol passed from his reach." That night, at Scotland Yard, Holmes met with Rook in a small stone-walled interview room, where the man sat under guard, hands folded tightly in front of him. The light overhead cast deep shadows across his face, which was composed but taut with frustration. "You've come to mock me, Holmes?" he asked. "Not at all," Holmes said, setting the silk-wrapped bundle on the table between them. "I've come to return what you never truly owned." Rook's eyes widened. For a long moment he said nothing, and then his breath came out in a long sigh. He leaned forward slowly, almost reverently, but did not touch the bundle. "You found it." "I did." Rook stared at it, the bitter edge of defeat softening into something like wonder. He never understood it. He hoarded it. He thought it was merely a symbol, but it chose me. It called to me. Holmes nodded once. "And yet you will die behind bars, not as a priest of the forgotten, but as a murderer with too much imagination." Rook chuckled hollowly. "Perhaps. But for one night I made a man walk through his dream. You must admit, that is no small feat." "It is a trick," Holmes said coldly. "A dangerous one, and not half as clever as you believed." As we left the yard that evening, Holmes was uncharacteristically quiet. I did not press him until we reached our rooms, where the idol now sat wrapped once more, awaiting proper authorities. "You're still uneasy," I said. He looked at the bundle for a long time. Men like Rook, and yes, even Varna, wrap their obsessions in the cloth of culture and mysticism. But what they serve is always the same. Power, Watson. Power and the illusion of control. That idol was never magical. It was a mirror. He turned away from it with finality. The dream, Watson, did not solve the case, but it revealed the cracks in the lie, and sometimes that is enough. The following morning dawned with a reluctant pale light, as if the sky itself were exhausted by the events of the previous day. I rose late to find Holmes already dressed, his violin resting untouched on the windowsill. He stood with one hand pressed against the glass, watching the carriages pass along Baker Street below, with a distant, reflective air. "You slept little, I suspect," I said, pouring coffee from the pot Mrs. Hudson had left on the tray. "Sleep is a poor companion when a puzzle is only partly solved," he replied without turning. "And, contrary to appearances, Watson, we are not yet at the final page." I raised an eyebrow. Surely Rook's confession, the idol, and De Vries's exoneration closed the matter. He turned then, his gaze sharp. "They resolve the surface of the mystery. But last night, as I reviewed the recovered papers, something continued to gnaw at me. A missing piece, as if we have traced the outline of the portrait, but not the expression on the face." He crossed to the writing desk and opened a folded sheaf of documents. The pages taken from Rook's journal, Varner's notes, and a copy of De Vries's original employment letter, retrieved from the Varner house. Holmes tapped one item in particular, a telegram. "This message was sent by Varner to a solicitor named Hugo Linley only a week before his death," Holmes said. "It reads, 'Should anything happen to me, open the sealed envelope under lock file H23. It contains full accounting of Rook affair. Signed, R.V.'" I leaned forward. "And this envelope?" "Still locked, according to Linley's clerk. But he expects us this morning." Within the hour, we were seated in the austere office of Linley and Burr on a narrow lane off Chancery Lane. Mr. Linley was a prim, spare man in his 60s, with white hair and ink-stained fingers. He seemed discomforted by our presence, though he knew Holmes by reputation and offered no objections to our request. "I confess," he said, as he opened the vault drawer, "I had nearly forgotten about the Varner instructions. Most of our clients dabble in dramatic flourishes before wills are drawn." He handed over a thick sealed envelope, yellowed slightly at the corners. Holmes slit it open with a letter opener and removed a stack of handwritten pages, their tone different from the formal rigidity of Varner's known letters. The ink was smudged in places, as if written in haste or distress. Holmes began to read aloud. "To whom this concerns, I have little time. I suspect I am being watched, and the idol has already brought more danger than I anticipated. Rook and I retrieved it together, but it was I who made the decision to sell, and he who resisted. What he never knew, what I never told anyone, is that the idol was only one part of a larger set. There are 3. We brought back only 1. The others remained hidden because I bribed our guide to lie about the second ruin." Holmes's brow furrowed. 3 idols, he murmured. So there was more to this obsession than Rook knew. He continued reading. "The real peril lies not in Rook's madness, but in the interest shown by a third party. A Mr. Simeon Rourke, posing as a collector from Copenhagen, has approached me twice. I believe he is not Scandinavian, but British, and that he once worked with the Foreign Office. He seeks the idol not for its beauty or history, but for what he believes it can do. I fear he will not stop with threats." I glanced at Holmes. "Rourke, another R?" Holmes gave a tight nod. "And conveniently one Rook never mentioned. We have been chasing one man, while another moved quietly in the background. The dream, the setup, the idol, perhaps they were only part of the plan. Rook may not have acted alone." We left the solicitor's office, with the contents of the envelope secured. As the cab rattled eastward once more, Holmes remained silent for some minutes, the vibration of the wheels nearly lulling me into a daze. Then he spoke. "There's something about the name Simeon Rourke. I have encountered it before." He rapped sharply on the roof of the cab. "Change of plan. Watson, we are paying a visit to the archives at the British Museum." By late morning we were seated in the musty silence of the museum's reading room. Holmes scanned ledger after ledger with relentless speed, while I pursued a narrower line. Shipping manifests from the East India Company, where Rook and Varner's earlier expeditions had passed through. Then I found it. "Holmes," I said quietly, tapping the record, Look here, Simeon. Rourke, listed as diplomatic attaché in Rangoon for 1 year, then expelled on grounds of conduct unbecoming. No further record. Holmes joined me. There, and this, a shipping crate addressed to Rourke, never claimed, confiscated, contents, unknown Burmese artifacts, likely related to the same expedition. I looked at him. Then he was involved, and may have been following Varna for years. Holmes nodded, eyes cold. And if he believes a second idol exists, he may not yet be done. We returned to Baker Street in haste. Holmes sent 2 telegrams, one to Inspector Lestrade requesting immediate surveillance on De Vries's lodgings, and another to the Danish embassy, inquiring whether any Simeon Rourke was ever granted diplomatic status in Copenhagen. The answer returned swiftly. No such man was ever employed. The rest of the day passed in tense waiting. At dusk, a knock came at our door. Lestrade entered, grim-faced. De Vries is missing. Holmes's expression did not change. When? Between 3 and 5. Left no note. Landlady says he answered the door to a man in a black coat, not Rook. Said he was returning something lost. Then both vanished. Holmes turned sharply to the fireplace and stood before it, silent. I saw his hands curl at his sides. He was taken, I said. Holmes gave a single nod. Rourke has decided the witness knows something more. Or perhaps he simply believes the second idol is still in play. Lestrade looked uncertain. But if it doesn't exist, Rourke thinks it does. That is all that matters. And if he believes De Vries was closer to Varna than he let on, he'll extract the truth however he can. I stepped forward. Then we must find him, and quickly. Holmes turned, his voice suddenly sharp. We shall. But we must do so not by force. Rourke is a careful man. Clever enough to leave no trail. We must draw him out. Using what? Holmes gave a thin smile. His belief in patterns, in dreams. He crossed to the desk and pulled out the bundle, the idol, still wrapped in silk. If we announce that a second idol has been located, found among Varna's effects, with De Vries as its intended custodian, Rourke will come to us. He cannot resist the symmetry. And when he does, Holmes looked to the door. Then, Watson, the real dream begins. Holmes worked with furious precision that night, moving between the writing desk, the fireplace, and the mantel with such quiet velocity that I had the distinct impression of watching a man move through several layers of thought at once. Ink stained his fingers, telegram forms piled beside the blotter, and a single candle sputtered defiantly as the hour passed midnight. I sat nearby, taking notes only when prompted, trying not to interrupt the chain of his thoughts. Finally, he handed me a sheet of paper covered in neat, exacting script. This, he said, is the announcement. I read quickly. It was phrased as an official release from the British Museum, drafted to appear as if leaked to the Times, announcing that among the late Sir Roderick Varner's effects, a second idol, one of unknown provenance but matching the earlier Mandalay relic in form and make, had been discovered during a private inventory. It went on to suggest that the item was being kept under examination pending authentication, under the temporary custodianship of the late Sir Roderick's secretary, Mr. Christopher De Vries. It's clever, I said. Implies just enough to lure someone with interest in the object, but not so much that it stirs official notice. Exactly, Holmes replied. Rourke will see the name and react. If he has De Vries, he may be uncertain whether the man told the truth. If he doesn't have him, he will fear that De Vries already gave something away. In both cases, the bait is irresistible. By noon the next day, the article had been placed through discreet contacts in the press, and Holmes, Lestrade, and I made our preparations. A room was secured at the Albion Hotel in Bloomsbury, elegant but not ostentatious, with a view of the street and access to a rear alley. The idol, still wrapped in its crimson silk, was placed inside a secure glass case atop a plinth, surrounded by books and documents to simulate an impromptu study area. Holmes had arranged for an official-looking placard to read, "Pending Custodial Review, Varna Collection 2. Lestrade, concealed in an adjacent suite, had 2 plainclothes men stationed at every exit. Holmes, however, insisted that we keep the front parlor lightly attended. "If Rourke is to make contact," Holmes explained, "he will do so as a gentleman. He does not break in, he persuades." It was decided that I would remain in the room with Holmes, playing the role of a visiting academic. A false register bore our names, Mr. P. Halloway and Dr. G. Latimer. We waited. An hour passed, then 2. Outside, the bells of nearby St. George's tolled 3 times. Then came the knock. Holmes did not move. "Enter," he called, with just the right measure of casual distraction. The door opened. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with a trim beard and eyes like polished obsidian. His hands, gloved in fine leather, held a walking cane with a silver cobra's head. His voice, when he spoke, was smooth and measured. "Pardon the intrusion," he said, "but I was told this room contained the Varna collection. I'm an independent scholar. Oriental antiquities are my passion. Simeon Rourke, at your service." Holmes, still seated, rose slowly and extended a hand. "Philip Halloway. And this is my colleague, Dr. Latimer. You've arrived at a fascinating moment." Rourke stepped forward, his eyes never quite leaving the case where the idol lay. I watched them flicker, just once, with something sharp. Not surprise, recognition. "It is rare to find such pieces intact," he said. "The curve of the shoulders, yes, and the indent at the base of the spine. Remarkable. I've seen its twin, you know." "Ah?" Holmes said lightly. "In Burma?" Rourke smiled faintly. "In Rangoon, once." He turned to us. "May I?" He gestured toward the glass case. Holmes nodded. "Of course." Within reason, Rourke bent slightly, examining the idol, and for a moment all expression drained from his face. He was no longer a man admiring a relic. He was a priest at an altar, or a man seeing a ghost. Then he straightened. "How did you come by it?" Holmes's reply was smooth. "Among the effects of Sir Roderick Varner. It seems he kept more secrets than even his estate suspected. De Vries mentioned it, almost offhandedly." "De Vries?" Rourke's tone was soft, but Holmes caught the edge. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "He has proven most helpful. Recovering rapidly, too, after his recent ordeal." Rourke smiled. "And where is he now?" Before I could reply, Holmes turned and poured 2 glasses of sherry from a decanter on the sideboard. "Mr. Rourke, you've traveled far and seem a man of considerable learning. Tell me, do you believe, as Varna did, that these idols possess some hidden potency? That they hold sway over men's dreams?" Rourke took the glass. He did not drink. "I believe men create the potency they fear," he said, "and sometimes that fear becomes prophecy." He stepped back from the case and glanced once more at the idol. "But I thank you for your hospitality. I should be going." Holmes's voice was cool and unmistakable. "I wouldn't." Rourke turned. 4 men stepped into the room from the hall, Lestrade and 3 plainclothes officers. One closed the door behind them. Rourke looked at each man in turn. He sighed, as if disappointed. "So the bait was meant for me." "Yes," Holmes said, "and you took it with admirable restraint." Rourke looked at him. "You've no evidence." "I have enough," Holmes replied. "A pattern of contact between yourself and Sir Roderick Varner. A journal entry naming you. A telegram sent by Varner warning of your involvement. And now, of course, your interest in this false idol." Rourke glanced at the case. "False?" Holmes smiled. "Of course. It's a replica cast last night by a museum contact of mine. The real one is in secure custody. Rourke's jaw tensed ever so slightly. Lestrade stepped forward. Mr. Rourke, you are hereby detained on suspicion of conspiracy to commit abduction, attempted coercion, and criminal intimidation. If Mr. de Vries is unharmed, we'll find him soon enough. Rourke offered no resistance, but he turned to Holmes as they led him out. He never understood it, you know, Varna. He feared the idol, but never heard it. De Vries heard it. That's why I needed him. Holmes watched him go without replying. Only when the door closed did he exhale, slowly. Send word to the river patrol, he said to Lestrade. Rourke would have had de Vries moved by water, if anywhere. Quiet, hidden. Check the docks nearest Limehouse. He's likely within the city still. Within hours, de Vries was found, bound, dazed, but alive, inside a small abandoned warehouse near the East India docks. He had been drugged, though less heavily this time. He remembered flashes, Rourke's voice, the idol, a whispered demand. Holmes visited him the following day in hospital. I watched from the corner as he stood beside the bed. You were not chosen by accident, Holmes said. He believed you had access to something he never fully understood. But your mind held nothing except fear, and that, in the end, was the one thing he couldn't control. De Vries stared up at him. Will it stop now? Holmes looked at him for a long moment, then replied gently, For you, yes. But the dreams of men like Rourke tend to echo far beyond their reach. That evening, Holmes returned to Baker Street and placed the original idol into a velvet-lined box, sealing it with wax and string. I watched him affix a label, to be returned under supervision to the Mandalay Archive, Rangoon. You still think it has no power? I asked. Holmes looked at the sealed box. Not in itself, but in the hands of men who believe it does. That belief is the sharpest blade. Then he placed the box beneath the floorboard in the corner and lit his pipe. Until it can be escorted home, he said. Let it dream here, quietly. And so it slept. The following days passed with a deceptive quietness. De Vries remained in the care of the hospital, slowly regaining lucidity and, with Holmes's guidance, beginning to recall the events that had been so artfully buried beneath the influence of mandragora and suggestion. Scotland Yard held Rook under tight surveillance, and Simeon Rourke's public persona, so carefully maintained over years of quiet manipulation, crumbled beneath the scrutiny of both the press and the Foreign Office. Still, Holmes showed no sign of triumph. There was something guarded in his manner, a tautness in his frame, that I recognized from previous cases, when some minor inconsistency still gnawed at his precision-trained instincts. On the third evening after Rourke's arrest, I returned to Baker Street to find Holmes seated not at the desk nor the fireside, but on the floor, cross-legged beside the velvet-lined box that housed the idol. The wax seal was unbroken. You mean to open it again? I asked, surprised. No, Holmes replied without looking up. But I'm considering what it was that kept them circling around this object like moths to a flame. Rook, Varner, and others unnamed. Intelligent men, all, and yet drawn to the thing as if it contained the very mechanism of fate. He tapped the box once, gently. What power lies in gold, Watson, save that which others give it? I remained silent. Holmes's tone was not rhetorical. There was a seriousness in it I had rarely heard. It was not superstition that concerned him, but something else, more unsettling. The idea that belief itself might be weaponized so convincingly that even the rational mind must treat it with caution. At length, he rose and resumed his habitual pacing. There is one matter left unresolved, he said. I looked up from the armchair. You mean the second idol? He nodded. Varner claimed it existed. Rook believed it had been hidden or destroyed. But what if... He paused mid-stride. Watson, he said slowly. Do you recall the letter Varner wrote to his solicitor? The phrasing? I searched my memory. Something about bribing the guide to lie about the second ruin? Yes, and that he kept the existence of the other idols secret even from Rook. But what if the second idol wasn't left behind in Burma? Holmes moved to the desk, pulled the journal from its shelf, and flipped rapidly through the pages. Here, listen to this line. The third idol, if it exists, must be lost. The second, however, was passed along to a safer custodian. Passed along, I repeated. You think he gave it to someone? I think he entrusted it, quietly. Perhaps even before his fallout with Rook. Someone he believed would never attract suspicion. But to whom? I asked. Holmes closed the journal and turned to me. That is the question we must answer. And I believe the answer lies not in the jungle, nor in the museum, but in the records of Sir Roderick's personal correspondence. Later that night, with permission from the Varner estate, secured by a reluctant but cooperative Linley, we returned to the house in Kensington. The drawing room had been cleared of its earlier grim contents, and the hearth was cold once more. Holmes wasted no time. He moved not to the desk or the cabinets, but to a simple rosewood chest tucked in the corner behind a lacquered screen. This, he said, was overlooked. But Varner, like all men of secrets, would have chosen the most unassuming place for his truest thoughts. He cracked open the chest and revealed a collection of envelopes bundled with twine, all bearing names and dates. Most were routine, correspondence with museums, shipping agents, minor lords in need of appraisal for their collections. But one stood out. It was addressed in a different hand, on older paper. No formal seal. The name, written in looping cursive, was familiar. Dr. Henrietta Lyle. Holmes smiled faintly. Watson, do you recall the lecture we attended on Burmese spiritual totems at the Oriental Society last year? Of course. Lyle was the speaker, a formidable woman. She and Varner once studied together. It appears their association ran deeper than academic circles. He slit the envelope open with a knife and drew out a brief letter. Henrietta, if anything should come to pass, I entrust you with the mirror. Keep it as a piece of art if you must, but do not yield it to those who speak in riddles and dreams. They will come, especially him. Do not respond, simply wait. R.V. The mirror, I echoed. A code name? Or a euphemism? If the first idol symbolized power, the second may well have symbolized knowledge or reflection. It would fit Varner's style to refer to it poetically. Then Lyle has it. I believe so. And now that Rourke is exposed, she may be in danger without knowing it. By morning, we were on our way to Hampstead, where Dr. Henrietta Lyle resided in a large but modest Georgian home, overgrown with ivy and flanked by statues of stylized animals, fetishes and relics, no doubt, from her years of research abroad. She received us cordially, though her manner was cautious. Her silver hair was tied in a loose knot, and her spectacles glinted with intelligence behind calm, sharp eyes. I suspected this visit might come, she said without preamble. Roderick warned me, though not in detail. Holmes nodded. You were his friend. We were more than that, she said simply. He trusted me with something he could no longer keep near. She led us to her study, and there, amidst shelves of books and catalogued relics, she gestured toward a simple black lacquer box atop a pedestal. Inside lay an object not unlike the first, but where the idol in our possession had been gold and curled in grim repose, this one was upright, carved from dark jade, with features smoother and more refined. Its eyes were closed. I've kept it locked here for years, she said. It is beautiful in its way, but I have never been comfortable in its presence. Holmes examined it silently, then looked to her. You were never approached? Only once. A letter, unmarked, asking about a reflection of the golden form. I never answered. Holmes gave a small nod. Then you've done well. But I must ask, would you be willing to transfer it to official custody? Temporarily. Lyle considered this. Will it be returned to Burma? Holmes smiled. That is my intent. Then yes, she said. Let it go. I've kept it long enough. That evening, back in Baker Street, Holmes placed the jade idol beside its golden counterpart, still sealed within its box. The two figures, though carved by different hands, seemed to face one another in silent communion. Now there are two, I said. Holmes nodded. 2 of 3. You think the third exists? He did not answer directly. Instead, he turned to the window, staring into the dark beyond. If it does, he said at last, let it remain where no man can find it. The first led to murder, the second to madness. The third, I suspect, would lead to something worse. He turned back, his eyes clear but wary. But for now, Watson, the dream has ended. Let us hope it does not stir again. The following days brought a sense of cautious closure. Dr. Lyle entrusted the jade idol to Holmes with quiet dignity and no visible regret. Together, the two artifacts, one golden, one green, were prepared for secure shipment under the care of the British Museum's most trusted conservators, with diplomatic assistance to ensure their return to Burma. Holmes saw to every detail himself, refusing even to delegate the drafting of the accompanying documentation. He remained steady but watchful, like a man checking the pulse of a patient no longer in danger, yet not entirely out of the woods. One afternoon, as I entered our lodgings at Baker Street, I found him in conference with Inspector Lestrade. They stood by the fireplace, a map of the Burmese highlands pinned across the mantelpiece, dotted with red ink circles. And you're certain this was not simply part of Varna's original fabrication? Lestrade was saying. Holmes nodded. As certain as one may be without walking the jungle itself. I reviewed both journals again. Varna hinted at a third idol, not just in metaphor, but in coordinates. There's a pattern in the spacing of the two known sites, which suggests a third point in the triangle. He feared it, yes, but he also recorded it, and that means someone else might find it as well. Lestrade sighed. And you believe Rourke was searching for this mythical third figure? I believe he suspected it existed, Holmes replied, and meant to use De Vries to find it. He thought the younger man had access to information Varna withheld. And does he? Not consciously, but dreams, Lestrade, as this case has taught us, are sometimes fashioned from memory, suggestion, and influence. We may never know what buried scraps of knowledge Varna inadvertently passed to him, but the fact remains, Rourke is not the only man interested in these artifacts. Word spreads. The idol has power only if men believe it does, but belief, Inspector, is often enough to start a war. Lestrade frowned. And where does that leave us? Holmes folded the map and replaced it behind the desk. With 2 idols recovered and a third unconfirmed, I suggest we do not speak of the matter again, especially not publicly. If Rourke was a symptom, there may yet be a cause lurking out of sight. Lestrade glanced at me. You must enjoy this, Watson, the drama of it all. I could do with a few less threats to civilization, I said dryly. But yes, the human mind, at its strangest, remains my companion's natural habitat. Holmes permitted himself a smile. After Lestrade departed, Holmes turned to me, more solemn now. I want you to accompany the shipment to the Foreign Office, he said. You'll hand it over with Dr. Lyle's documentation. No detours, no delays. I'll remain here. Why not come yourself? Because I need to ensure we are not being watched. I've noticed a presence. That chilled me. You're certain? I've seen the same man pass by our windows 3 times in the last 2 days. Middle height, grey coat. He never lingers, but he's watching, measuring. Could it be press? Possibly. but I doubt it. There's a precision in his manner. He looks like a man waiting for a signal. The following morning, I did as instructed, transporting the velvet-lined cases to the Foreign Office with all the gravity of a diplomatic courier. At every corner I glanced back. No grey coat, no watchers. But Holmes's instincts were rarely wrong. When I returned that afternoon, Holmes was seated in his chair once again, tapping his fingers together in that slow, mechanical rhythm he adopted when something deep within him churned. "Well?" I asked. He motioned to the paper on the table. I picked it up. It was a letter, handwritten, unsigned. The golden god has blinked. The mirror has closed its eyes, but the third still watches. Soon it will be awake. S. I read it twice before looking up. Delivered by hand? Yes, slipped beneath the door, some time before you returned. Our watcher never came close, but someone else did. S, I said. It must be a remaining associate of Rourke's. Or someone else altogether, Holmes murmured. There are always more shadows behind the first. Then it's not over. No, he said softly. But the rhythm has changed. The initial storm has passed. What comes now will be more subtle, more dangerous. Men who work in dreams do not charge. They infiltrate. That night sleep came only reluctantly. I lay awake for some time, listening to the steady creaks and groans of the Baker Street house, everyone sounding like the brush of a fingertip on glass. In the early hours, I rose and found Holmes still seated in the parlor, fully dressed, the wax-sealed shipping manifest spread before him like a battlefield map. "We have contained the fire," he said, without looking up, "but we haven't extinguished the kindling." I stood behind him. "What would you have us do?" He tapped a blank space beside the drawing of the third idol's theoretical site. "We wait, and we prepare." He turned the paper over, drew his pen, and began to write in silence. Hypothetical design of third figure, posture reversed, orientation facing east, possibility of composite materials, symbol of duality, function, not power nor wisdom, but passage or warning. When he looked up again, his expression had shifted. "It was never about the objects, Watson. It was always about the idea that there is knowledge we were not meant to wield. These men convinced themselves they could hold it in their hands, but no one ever does. That's the irony. The moment they believe it belongs to them is the moment it begins to destroy them." I looked down at the sketches. They were rudimentary, but precise. Holmes's attempt to give form to a thing that might not even exist. "What if the third idol is truly gone?" I asked. Holmes closed his notebook. "Then let it stay buried. But if it rises, Watson, it will do so in silence and shadow." He leaned back, finally allowing weariness to catch up with him. "For now," he said, "we've won the space between dreams." And with that, the room fell into stillness. The golden idol was gone. The jade one no longer stared across the study. And in the quiet corners of the city, though none could say from where, a whisper passed like a breath through fog. The dream had ended, but something else had begun. The days that followed unfolded with deceptive calm. Baker Street returned, at least outwardly, to its familiar rhythms, the rattle of the coal grate, the hum of conversation below stairs, and Holmes's violin once more threading its way through the long afternoons, often in minor keys that stirred something uneasy in the blood. The case had not closed in the traditional sense, but rather slipped into a lull, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Holmes spoke little, but I observed him closely. The Morning Post, which once drew idle curiosity, now received forensic attention. He took his walks not along his usual circuitous routes through Regent's Park, but down to the river, where fog clung heavier and silence pressed closer. On the fifth morning, as I joined him at breakfast, I found him not with a newspaper, but an envelope, plain, unmarked, resting unopened beside his untouched eggs. He slid it toward me. "It arrived just after dawn," he said. "By hand again. Mrs. Hudson swears no one knocked." I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single card, black-edged. No salutation, no signature, only a line written in small, delicate handwriting. "When the third sleeps, the door will open." I looked up sharply. Holmes's face was composed, but his fingers, steepled beneath his chin, pressed tighter than usual. "The handwriting does not match Rourke's, nor any of his known associates," he said. "But the phrasing, it's consistent with the pattern of messages we've received. Metaphor, concealment, but also direction. A warning or an invitation. I'm no longer certain which. Holmes, this is madness. These phrases, they're riddles, not threats." "Are you certain of that?" he asked quietly. "Recall what Rook said in the interrogation room. De Vries heard the idol. That's why I needed him. He believed the idol communicated, or rather, that it catalyzed a vision, an insight. The dream, Watson, was never simply hypnotism. It was the delivery system, a way to implant an idea deeper than memory." I felt a chill stir. "You think whoever wrote this believes the third idol isn't just real, but alive in some way?" Holmes did not answer. Instead, he reached into his desk drawer and drew out the folded map once more, the triangle connecting the locations where the first two idols had been discovered. He tapped the inferred third point in the northeast quadrant of the Shan states, near a cluster of ruins labeled only as Sang-Yi. "There," he said. "If the third idol exists, that is where it would be. The ruins lie in disputed territory, largely untouched since Varna's original expedition. He never marked it publicly, only in cipher, through coordinates and veiled references in his journals. He feared what might be there." I studied the map. Then Holmes, "And yet you're considering going?" "I am. Even after what happened here. After Rook. After De Vries." He looked at me, not coldly, but with an intense stillness that made my words fall away. "This is not merely a crime, Watson. It is a question, a riddle that spans continents and minds, and perhaps something more. If we do not investigate it now, others will. And I do not trust what hands might follow us." I sat back, wrestling with the weight of it. "Then we go together." Holmes gave a faint smile, as if he had already assumed it. Within the week, our preparations were made. Through official channels and Holmes's well-placed connections, we secured travel under the guise of academic surveyors tied to the British Museum. The Jade Idol had already been dispatched to Mandalay, where it was to be housed temporarily until its fate could be determined diplomatically. Holmes's instructions, however, had delayed its final display. He suspected rightly that its twin might alter its meaning entirely. Our journey took us from Southampton to Bombay, thence across to Rangoon, and from there on to Mandalay by rail and riverboat. In every station, Holmes watched the shadows more carefully than the signs. He spoke little of London, but often referenced Varna's writings, his mind threading connections between myth and motive with a precision that defied exhaustion. By the time we reached the Highlands, it was late April. The forest had thickened around us, tall teak trees choking out the sun, the air heavy with wet bark and unseen insects. We travelled the final miles on foot, led by a local guide named Min Thane, whose grandfather had once served as interpreter to the very expedition Varna led. "It is not a good place," Min said softly one evening, as we made camp near a crumbled stone path overrun with moss. "They say the earth there does not remember the names of men, only the idols." Holmes made no reply, but I saw his fingers twitch, as though echoing the phrase in his mind. The ruins of Sang-Yi were smaller than I expected. No great temple columns or sweeping reliefs, but sunken courtyards and half-buried statues whose faces had eroded into suggestion. At the center, beneath a knotted canopy of banyan trees, stood a stone basin, circular, with 3 empty sockets carved into the rim. Holmes knelt before it, brushing away centuries of detritus. "One for each figure," he said. This was the cradle. They were not placed for worship, but for observation. Orientation suggests astronomical alignment. See how the northern point tracks the pole star, while the others align with solstice markers. "And the third?" I asked. He stood and stepped into the circle, where a narrow shaft of sunlight pierced the trees and touched the center. "Here," he whispered. "This is where the third would have stood." We searched the area for hours. No signs of recent habitation, no objects left behind. But as dusk fell, Holmes found something half buried at the base of a broken column. A shard of carved obsidian, marked with the same spiral motif we had seen on the base of the golden idol. "It was here," he said. "Destroyed. Hidden? I cannot say. But it was not taken by Rook or his men. He never reached this place." That night, we made camp within the ruined courtyard. Holmes barely slept. He paced the clearing, eyes tracking stars through breaks in the canopy. At one point, he stood for nearly an hour, unmoving, staring into the shadows where the basin lay. The morning brought no answers, only a quietness so complete it hummed in the ears. We returned by the same route, though Holmes remained strangely subdued throughout. It was not disappointment that weighed on him, but contemplation. He had seen something in Sang-Yi, not a vision, not a dream, but a confirmation of his suspicion, that the idols were not just relics, but anchors for something larger, something conceived in belief and maintained through ritual and obsession. Back in Rangoon, before our passage home, Holmes sent one final telegram to Lestrade. "No further pursuit necessary. Let the past sleep in the ruins. We have retrieved what matters. The rest belongs to silence." On the voyage back, I asked him what he meant. Holmes did not answer immediately. He sat by the railing, the sea dark beyond him. "Watson," he said at last, "the third idol was never an object." I turned to him. "Then what was it?" He looked at me, and for once there was something close to unease in his eyes. "A boundary," he said, "between understanding and madness." And that was the end of it, or so we hoped. Our return to London was accompanied by grey skies and the muffled bustle of a city that felt as though it had moved on in our absence, oblivious to the trail of obsession, myth, and madness we had followed across the world. Yet as we stepped once more into our familiar lodgings at 221B Baker Street, I knew the matter had not left Holmes. Though the idols had been handed over to responsible authorities, and though the press had lost interest in the strange case of Sir Roderick Varner's death, something still lingered. Holmes was not done. He resumed his quiet rituals, the chemical experiments, the violin, the clippings from half-forgotten journals. Yet often I would catch him at the window, gazing not at the street, but at nothing in particular, his mind caught in that peculiar twilight where deduction becomes intuition. The final letter arrived in early June. It bore no return address, only a wax seal with a symbol we recognized immediately, the spiral motif found on the base of the golden idol and the obsidian shard in Sang-Yi. Holmes slit it open, read the short message silently, and passed it to me without a word. The idols were not doors, but keys. You have them now. Do you know what they open? We are not the first to ask. We will not be the last. There was no signature, only a single character at the bottom, a symbol, 3 eyes within a triangle. Holmes folded the letter carefully and set it aflame in the hearth. "It never ends, does it?" I asked quietly. "No," he said, "because it never began where we thought." He turned to me then, his voice as calm as ever, but touched with something I could not name. "Do you remember what I told you when this began, Watson? that the dream wasn't merely a vision, it was a message. I do. He nodded toward the hearth. Well, this is the final message. The idols, the symbols, the dreams, they were never about power, or even about belief. They were about transference of fear, of obsession. The moment one man begins to believe, truly believe, that an object controls his fate, that belief itself becomes the virus. And it spreads, I murmured. Rook, Varna, De Vries, Rourke, and now someone else, Holmes said. Someone who never appeared, someone behind them all. He reached into the cabinet and withdrew a folder, one I had not seen before. Inside were sketches, notes, photographs of temple fragments, and a single sheet written in Holmes's tidy hand. At the top was a name, the Circle of Three. He laid it on the table between us. It is no longer about one man, he said. It is a society, a network. They believe there is knowledge hidden in the spaces between reason. Knowledge the idols were designed to guard or awaken. Do you believe that? I asked. Holmes gave a quiet laugh. Number. But I believe they do, and that is enough. I sat back. And what do we do now? He turned to the window once more. Outside, London was unchanged. Smoke curling from chimneys. A cart creaking past on wet cobblestones. The ordinary world. We wait, he said, because they will come again. Perhaps not with idols or dreams, but with ideas. Always with ideas. And when they do, I shall be ready. I closed my notebook then. The case was over. No courts would try Simeon Rourke. No article would untangle the labyrinth Holmes had entered. But justice, I believe, had been served, not with arrests, but with prevention, with understanding. The Circle of Three had been unmasked, if not dismantled, and their obsession had lost its grip, for now. As the final fog of that long case lifted, I could not help but recall the first words De Vries had spoken to us, trembling in our sitting room. I had a dream, and in it I saw a man murdered. He had not known then how deeply that dream would pull us, nor did we. But as Holmes once said, to solve a mystery is to strip illusion from the truth, but to prevent one, that is the highest form of reason. And so we left the case of the dream that solved itself behind us, or at least we tried. But somewhere, perhaps in Burma, or in some dim reading room, or in the imagination of a man who has just begun to believe, something waits, not a god, not a ghost, but the next idea. Holmes watches for it still, and I, as ever, keep the record.